And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
And welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. President Obama is heading to Massachusetts today, where he will urge the Senate to move forward on a climate change bill. The president's speech comes just 7 weeks before the start of the United Nations Copenhagen Climate Conference. Next week, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee will hold 3 days of hearings to discuss the climate change bill proposed by Senators Barbara Boxer and John Kerry. While the Obama administration has acknowledged no bill will be passed before the Copenhagen talks, pressure is growing from grassroots organizations to take action. On Saturday, the group 350.org is organizing an International Climate Action Day. More than 4,500 events are scheduled to take place in 170 nations. 350.org is named after what scientists have identified as a sustainable target for carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, 350 parts per million. We are currently at 387 parts per million. While most climate scientists say the effects of global warming are happening far sooner than initially projected, many Americans appear to be dismissing the threat of climate change.
A poll released on Thursday by the Pew Research Center for the People and the Press found that just 57% of respondents believe there's solid evidence that the world's getting warmer, down 20 percentage points in just 3 years. The poll also found only 35% of Americans believe global warming is a very serious problem. Well, today we're joined by two of the major thinkers, writers, activists tackling climate change. With us here in New York at our Firehouse studio is writer and environmentalist Bill McKibben, co-founder and director of 350.org. 20 years ago, he published The End of Nature, the first general audience book about global warming. Bill McKibben has described the talks in Copenhagen as, quote, the most important diplomatic gathering in the world's history. We're also joined by the Australian scientist Tim Flannery. He's the author of the international bestseller, The Weathermakers. His latest book is called Now or Never: Why We Must Act Now to End Climate Change and Create a Sustainable Future. Tim Flannery is chair of the Copenhagen Climate Council. He's a mammologist and paleontologist by training. As a field zoologist, he discovered and named more than 60 species. In 2007, Tim Flannery was named Australian of the Year. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! And on this issue of President Obama. He just went to Copenhagen to push for the Olympics taking place in Chicago. Is there really a question about whether he will go back there on this issue? You have called this meeting perhaps the most important meeting to take place in world history. Why do you say that?
Here's the thing about Obama and Copenhagen and everything else. We can't blame our leaders yet because we haven't built the kind of movements that demand that they do things and that give them the political space to do it. If Copenhagen is a failure, that failure will be measured not in decades, but in geological time. President Obama can't let it be a failure. None of us can let it be a failure. Everybody who's listening to this, there's a rally or event happening within a few miles of their home tomorrow. If they go to 350.org, they can find out exactly where it is. Make some noise. We've got no right to complain about our leaders until we've given them the leadership they need. That's how it works.
As we go to broadcast, Bill, the protests, rallies, actions around the country in this largest day of global action in the history of the world are already underway.
People are jumping the gun a little bit, and we're getting amazing pictures beginning to arrive from places like Addis Ababa, from all across the Pacific, from New Zealand and Australia. It's quite remarkable to think that the largest day of political action in the planet's history will center around a fairly arcane scientific fact, a data point. You would have said that it was too complicated for people or too hard for them to assimilate. But this is the most important number in the world. People are realizing that. People are realizing that their future, in the starkest terms, depends on the world's leaders understanding that this debate is not so much between the U.S. and China and the EU. It's mostly between human beings on the one hand and physics and chemistry on the other. And today and tomorrow, in 177 nations, people are standing up for the science, saying, pay attention to the real situation.
And yet there remains this huge disconnect between the American public and the public in the rest of the world. As we said, only about 35% of the American people believe this is a serious problem. Your understanding of why there is this huge disconnect?
Two things. One, we're the most addicted country in the world, so it makes sense that we'd be deepest in denial, I suppose. The second is, we've never really had a popular movement about climate. We've left this to the experts on the theory that if we keep repeating how bad the peril is, our leaders will take action. Now we're doing the work of building the kind of grassroots movement that changes hearts and minds, that moves people to understand what the problem is. And hopefully those images flooding in from around the world will really open people's hearts when they understand that people are protesting across Africa, across Asia, across Latin America, across places where people did nothing to cause this problem, but are willing to take a real role in helping to solve it.
Tim Flannery, you've been traveling the United States. Talk about the awareness in Australia and the awareness in the United States around global warming. What's your sense?
Well, Amy, you know, they're very different things. In Australia, it's impossible to avoid an understanding of climate change because it's in our face every day. We have terrible problems with water security at the moment across southern Australia. Our fifth largest city, Adelaide, may be out of drinking water next year. Our National Water Commissioner's said that he can't guarantee drinking water to that city as of the end of next year. We've had dust storms, we've had fires, we've had cyclones, we've had bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef. And so no matter where you live in Australia, you become aware of climate change. Here in the US, I think you've been a little bit buffered, but from those changes, there's certainly some impacts, particularly in the western forests here, you can see it. But Australia is a harbinger, I think, for what will happen in the United States. But one of the big factors here that's so very different is that the population's views seem to be divided along political lines. It's a tragedy that, in a way, you know, the Democrats represent the proactive side and the Republicans seem to represent a side that wants to ignore the issue. Elsewhere in the world, that isn't the case. In Britain, for example, the Conservative Party is a very green party. So there's something about the political mix here and the sort of the relative insulation of the population from some of these changes that have made levels of awareness here much lower than elsewhere in the world. And that is such a problem for us because unless the US can move forward with its cap and trade bill to deal with this issue, I'm afraid many other countries are going to take a less than adequate stance during these negotiations in December.
Tim Flannery, you mentioned the problems that you've had there. You recently had the wildfires that took about 170 lives there. And here in the United States, obviously, wildfires, especially in the Southwest, have grown dramatically in recent years. But again, there's no connection that the public is making between these calamities and the overall change in the Earth's climate.
That's very strange to me. And maybe it's just that in Australia the situation is so stark. You know, up until 12 years ago in southeastern Australia, we enjoyed a regular winter rainfall regime. And the rain still falls, incidentally. It just falls over the Southern Ocean, about 200 miles south of where it used to fall. And we can all see that. We all experience the impacts of it. And somehow or other, it's become widely understood in the Australian public that this is the result of a changing climate. You really have to live in our country a little while, I think, to understand just how profound these impacts have been. There's no getting away from them. It's not just one phenomena, it's a series of things that have changed. And everyone who takes an interest in this issue really does understand it.
Tim, in your book, Now or Never, you take the reader on a guided tour of the environmental challenges we face and the potential solutions, big and small. Take us on that tour right now.
Sure, I will. Look, you know, the thing is, as Bill said, 350 is the key figure. And that means the problem is a lot more pressing than we realised even 5 years ago. The science has moved forward, our understanding of how CO2 impacts the Earth's climate system has grown. And so we know that there is that very tight deadline. We need to both reduce our emissions and we need to get some gas out of the air. Ideally, in terms of reducing emissions, we need to either close down or retrofit every conventional coal-fired power plant on the planet by 2030. Now that is an enormous job. I mean, and retrofit it with carbon capture and storage. It's the only other option. That's a huge job, and I don't think we'll get that. So we're going to have to attack this issue from a series of different directions. We're going to have